Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we continue with part 2, The Sons of the Widow, from the Orders of the Quest by Manly P. Hall. The Adepts, Orders of the Quest. The Sons of the Widow. In the 3rd century after Christ, a Persian mystic, born in the faith of Zoroaster and inspired by the doctrines of the Chaldeans, preached a religious philosophy which was to influence the entire course of Western civilization. Manes, or Mani, proclaimed himself the Paraclete, the comforter promised by Christ to his disciples. The true name of this Persian sage was Shuraik, in Latin Cubricus, but after his initiation he took the name of Manes, which, according to Plutarch, means the Anointed. Manes, the founder of the Manichaean sect, was born in Babylon, AD 215 to 216. He received his early education from his father, a devoted religious man, whose spiritual convictions were influenced by Mandean, Gnostic, and Christian associations. There are also indications that both father and son had a familiarity with the teachings of Sabianism. Later, Manes traveled extensively, was a voluminous writer, and was a profound student of the religions of Transsaxiana, India, and Western China. Manes was an initiate of the mysteries of Mithras, and among his teachers was Terebinus, an Egyptian philosopher and magician. There is a tradition that Manes was at one time a Christian, but this the Church has emphatically denied. It is certain, however, that he contracted early heretical sects, and was also cognizant of the Kabbalistic speculations of the Jewish mystics. He regarded the philosophical systems of the pagan sages as superior to both Judaism and primitive Christianity. He proclaimed his own ministry at the court of the Persian king, Shapur I, AD 240 to 242. Possibly on the coronation day of that monarch. The career of the prophet Manes made many demands upon his courage and devotion, but he faced the disasters of his life, sustained by initial visions and mystical experiences. He was unable to maintain a favorable position in the Persian court due to the pressure exerted against him by the priest of Zoroaster. He acquired some distinction as a physician, but his skill was not sufficient to preserve the life of one of the sons of the ruling prince. His prestige undermined, Manes was exiled through the contrivances of the Manichaeans, and he undertook his memorable journeys. During this same period, he lived for a year in a cave with only wild herbs for food. Later, Manes was recalled to Persia by a more generous prince, was received with great honors, and a palace was erected for his use. For a brief time his fortunes flourished, and he was consulted on important matters of state. But when Bahram first ascended the throne, the prophet fell upon evil times. Bahram, for political reasons, supported the Zoroastrian clergy, and these were resolved to destroy the heretical sect and its founder. Manes was crucified and flayed alive, AD 276 and 277, and his body was exposed to various indignities. The doctrine of Manes was rooted in Persian dualism, but he drew essential dogmas from the various schools of Southern Europe, Mesopotamia, North Africa, and Central Asia. The Manichaeans practiced the sacraments of baptism and communion. They accepted the ministry of Christ, but not the divinity of Jesus. Manes condemned the Christians as worshippers of idols, declaring that they had substituted men for gods, and then images for men. The sect, however, admired St. Paul, and acknowledged Jesus Impatibilis, the Christ, within that was the hope of glory. After the death of Manes, the progress of the sect was entrusted to a circle of initiates, and these defined the degrees of the order, its initiatory rites, signs, symbols, and passwords. The broad esoteric foundation of Manichaeism appealed to scholars of all beliefs, including the better-informed Christians. Solomon Reinach gives the following valuable summary of the history of the sect. The Manichaeans were gentle and peaceable persons. This was the opinion of the Greek philosopher Libanius. But as they rejected the rights of existing churches and claimed to confine themselves to the ministrations of their own priest, those of other religions persecuted them furiously and excited the mob against them by calumnies. When it was first attacked in Persia, Manichaeism spread towards Turkestan, India, and China, and at the same time towards Africa by the way of Syria and Egypt. Diocletian prohibited in AD 290, and the Christian emperors from AD 377 onward legislated against it. The Vandals burnt or exiled the Manichaeans. African Manichaeism is known to us chiefly through the works of St. Augustine, who wrote long treatises against its doctrine after having been their pupil. In the East, the sect was almost exterminated by the severity of Justinian, but it formed again in Asia Minor. We read of the Paulitanas in Armenia, 7th to 12th centuries, the Bogomils in Thrace, 10th to 11th century, the Byzantine emperors, Alexis Comnenus, in particular, pursued these inoffensive secreties with sword and fire, and in the 11th century, Manichaeism, brought by the commerce of the Levant, penetrated into southern France and gave rise to the powerful sect of the Cathari, who were exterminated by the Inquisition. Hecky Thorne extends this history with many interesting details. He notes, by changing its name, seat, and figurative language, Manichaeans spread in Bulgaria, Lombardy, Tartariani, France, as Cathari, and Albigenses, etc., united with the Saracens and openly made war upon the emperor, and its followers perished by thousands in battle and at the stake, and from its secular trunk sprung the so-called heresies of the Hushites and Wycliffites, which opened the way for Protestantism. The same author then establishes the Templars and Freemasons in the Manichaean descent, and concludes by showing how their doctrines were echoed in the songs of the troubadours and the covenant of the guilds. From the societies, fraternities, and orders which perpetuated the esoteric doctrine of the Manichaeans, we gain considerable insight into the essential teachings of the sect. They believed in a primitive religion ever existing in the world, of which formal theologies were corrupted forms. They held that enlightened and purified love was the highest of human emotions, and manifested as a simple and natural love for God in heaven above and for man on earth below. The practical religion of love was expressed through kindliness, friendliness, tolerance, and patience. The wise man became the protector or father of those less informed than himself. Only those who truly loved their fellow men and proved that after affection through the defense of their rights of men were entitled to regard themselves as religious. The secret assemblage of the Manichaeans was dedicated to the liberation of the human being from all despotism and tyranny. The end to be obtained was an enduring brotherhood of mankind. Man should be ruled by love alone, and should love their rulers. Leaders should deserve this affection, and all kingdoms and nations should dwell together in peace, governed by just laws and noble examples. All tyranny must end. All false doctrines must fall when the light of truth, the Christ within, is acknowledged as the universal Redeemer. St. Augustine was drawn to Manichaeism because it interpreted the Christian religion in terms acceptable to his inquiring mind. He had already decided that the Christian church was ridden with superstition and lacked philosophic depth. He remained absorbed in this so-called heresy for 9 years, but was never able to penetrate deeply enough into the mysticism of the sect to overlook the shortcomings of the members. Certainly his subsequent opinions were influenced by his association with the followers of Manes. He departed from them through a disinterest in mysticism. for which his intellect was not suited. The church, in the treatment of the Manichaeans, followed its usual procedure of accusing all heretical groups of practicing immoral and infernal rites. St. Augustine, who had an intimate knowledge of the sect, made no such accusations. His temperament would have inclined him to do so had there been any reasonable grounds. After having departed from the heresy of Manes, St. Augustine came under the influence of Bishop Ambrose, a fine and noble man addicted to the teachings of Origen. Origen now stands precariously on the borderline of heresy, for he himself was influenced by Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, and, incredible as it may seem, by the doctrine of Manes. Some of the writings of Manes have survived, and from them we learn their concept of the divine nature. The Spirit of God is light, radiant with the virtue of love, faith, fidelity, high-mindedness, wisdom, meekness, knowledge, understanding, mystery, and insight. Leo the Great decided that such a belief should not be stamped out, lest the creed of the church be extinguished. This pontiff also found it embarrassing to contemplate the idea that in the spiritual succession Jesus was succeeded by Manes, who was the last and greatest of the prophets, emanated from the divine, and who was the ambassador of the light of the world. One of the annual rites of the Manichaeans was celebrated to commemorate the crucifixion of the prophet. This consisted of placing a chair on a platform with 5 steps. Those members of the order who had purified themselves for the occasion were permitted to kneel before this empty chair, which symbolized the unseen master of their sect. This empty chair is reminiscent of the vacant throne of Osiris in the Egyptian initiatory ritual. The followers of Manes were called the Sons of the Widow, and the founder himself was referred to as the widow's son. The popular story that Manes gained this title by being redeemed from slavery by a rich widow is about as plausible as the legend that the Order of the Garter was created in honor of the Countess of Salisbury Garter. Horus, the savior god of the Osirian mysteries of Egypt, was a widow's son. He was posthumously conceived by the Holy Spirit of Osiris, his murdered father. The ghost of Osiris overshadowed his sister wife, Isis, who had dressed herself in widow's weeds to lament her dead husband. Horus, the strangely and immaculately conceived, was destined to become the hero of the world and the avenger of his father. In fact, it was believed by some that Horus was possessed by the spirit of his own father. The hieroglyphic of Osiris is the all-seeing eye, combined with the empty throne. Isis is the virgin of the world, who bears the divine child without the loss of her virginity. She is the esoteric tradition who gives birth to the Adepts by a mystery in the spirit. She is the Sophia of the Gnosis, the Blessed Demoiselle of the troubadours and the later mystics. In Christian and Neo-Christian symbolism, Sophia appears again as the bride of the Lamb. Manes, therefore, was not literally a widow's son, for his father survived to assist in his education. He had attained the second birth, that is, he had been born out of the womb of the mysteries, and those of his followers who had received the initiation were identified in the same way. By his martyrdom, Manes became another Osiris, Lord of the empty throne. He overshadowed his order as a spirit, and from the sanctuary of Manes were born new sons to extend his doctrines, thus becoming, in a mystical sense, the re-embodiment of himself. Deprived of their master, the body of the Manichaeans was appropriately symbolized by the legend of Isis mourning for her martyred lord. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.